In November 1959, Merleau-Ponty was working on what would become the unfinished final book, The Visible and the Invisible. Only 100 years after the birth of Henri Bergson and less than 2 years before his own death. One note reads, "Meaning is invisible, but the invisible is not the contradictory of the visible. The visible itself has an invisible inner framework, membrane. And the invisible is the secret counterpart of the visible. It appears only within it. It is nicht zu präsentbar, unpresentable. It's presented to me as such within the world. One cannot see it there, and every effort to see it there makes it disappear. But it is in the line of the visible. It is its virtual focus. It is inscribed within it in filigree. The comparisons between the invisible and the visible, the domain, the direction of thought, are not comparisons, as in Heidegger. They mean that the visible is pregnant with the invisible, that to comprehend fully the visible relations, house, one must go into the relations of the visible with the invisible. The other's visible is my invisible. My visible is the other's invisible. This formula, that of Sartre, is not to be retained. We have to say, being is this strange encroachment by reason of which my visible, although it is not superposable on that of the other, nevertheless opens upon it, that both open upon the same sensible world. And it is the same encroachment, the same junction at a distance, that makes the messages from my organs, the monocular images, reassemble themselves into one sole vertical existence and one sole world. In another note from November, he writes, "The senses, dimensionality, being. Each sense is a world that is absolutely incommunicable for other senses, and yet constituting a something which, through its structure, is from the first open upon the world of the other senses, and with them forms one sole being. Sensorality, for example, a color, yellow, it surpasses itself of itself. As soon as it becomes the color of the illumination, the dominant color of the field, it ceases to be such or such a color. It has therefore of itself an ontological function. It becomes apt to represent all things. With one sole movement, it imposes itself as particular and ceases to be visible as particular. The world is this whole where each part, when one takes it for itself, suddenly opens unlimited dimensions, becomes a total part. Now, this particularity of the color, of the yellow, and this universality are not contradictions, are together sensorality itself. It is by the same virtue that the color, the yellow, at the same time gives itself as a certain being and as a dimension, the expression of every possible being. What is proper to the sensible, as to language, is to be representative of the whole, not by sign-signification relation or by the immanence of the parts in one another and in the whole, but because each part is torn up from the whole, comes with its roots, encroaches upon the whole, transgresses the frontiers of the others. It is thus that the parts overlap, transparency, that the present does not stop at the limits of the visible. Behind my back, perception opens the world to me as the surgeon opens a body, catching sight through the window he has contrived of the organs in full functioning, taken in their activity, seen sideways. It is thus that the sensible initiates me to the world as language to the other. By encroachment, überschreiten, exceeds, transcends. Perception is not first a perception of things, but a perception of elements, water, air, of rays of the world, of things which are dimensions, which are worlds. I slip on these elements, and here I am in the world. I slip from the subjective to being. The alleged contradiction between the yellow as something and the yellow as the title of a world. This is not a contradiction, for it is precisely within its particularity as yellow, and through it, that the yellow becomes a universe, or an element. That a color can become a level, a fact becomes a category, exactly as in music. Describe a note as particular, i.e., in the field of another tone, and the same note has become that within whose key a music is written. The veritable movement toward the universal. The universal is not above, it is beneath, as in Claudel. It is not before, but behind us. Atonal music equals the equivalent of the philosophy of being in indivision. Like paintings without identifiable things, without the skin of things, but giving their flesh, the Transponierbarkeit, transposability, is a particular case of a more general transposition of which atonal music is the thematization. All this implies the being in indivision. This universality of the sensible, or presentation, of what is not as or presentable, i.e., the original presentation of what is not originally presentable. The sensible, hollowed out in the being without restriction, that being which is between my perspective and that of the other, my past and my present. What is proper to the perceived, to be already there, to not be through the act of perception, to be the reason for this act, and not the reverse. Sensuality is transcendence, or a mirror of transcendence. Depth and back and behind. It is preeminently the dimension of the hidden. Every dimension is of the hidden. There must be depth, since there is a point whence I see, since the world surrounds me. Depth is the means the things have to remain distinct, to remain things, while not being what I look at present. It is preeminently the dimension of the simultaneous. Without it, there would not be a world or being. There would only be a mobile zone of distinctness which could not be brought here without quitting all the rest, and a synthesis of these views. Whereas, by virtue of depth, they coexist in degrees of proximity, they slip into one another and integrate themselves. It is hence, because of depth, that the thing has a flesh. That is, opposed to my inspection, obstacles, a resistance which is precisely their reality, their openness, their totum simul. The look does not overcome depth, it goes around it. Depth is Urstiften, originally given or originally founded. Depth is originally founded in what I see in clear vision, as retention is in the present, without intentionality. C.F. Metzger, saying that it arises at the moment when it was going to be impossible to have a direct vision of 2 points at the same time. Then, the two images that are out of phase are not superposable. They suddenly take as profiles of the same thing in depth. This is not an act or an intentionality. which would go to an in itself and would give only juxtaposed in itselfs. It is in general, and by virtue of a field property, that this identification of two incompossible views is made, and because depth is open to me, because I have this dimension, so as to move my look in it, this openness. And in another note from the same time, philosophy has never spoken, I do not say of passivity, we are not effects, but I would say of the passivity of our activity, as Valerie spoke of a body of the spirit. New as our initiatives may be, they come to birth at the heart of being. They are connected onto the time that streams forth in us, supported on the pivots or hinges of our life. Their sense is a direction. The soul always thinks. This is in it a property of its state. It cannot not think because a field has been opened in which something, or the absence of something, is always inscribed. This is not an activity of the soul, not a production of thoughts in the plural. And I am not even the author of that hollow that forms within me by the passage from the present to the retention. It is not I who makes myself think, any more than it is I who makes my heart beat. From there leaves the philosophy of Leibniz, experience, and pass to the philosophy of Urstiftung, original founding, or institution. A direction of thought. This is not a metaphor. There is no metaphor between the visible and the invisible. The invisible, either my thought for myself or the sensible given to the other for me. Metaphor is too much or too little. Too much if the invisible is really invisible. Too little if it lends itself to transposition. There is no metaphor, one, because thought involves a quasi-locality that has to be described. Locality not by inference in the spatio-temporal point, but locality by elastic tie. One cannot say that a mind is here, but one can say that it is not there. This negation, little by little, extends to all parts of the world and of the living body, and yet there is a locality by investment. And when all that is said, there is the theater of apparition of the other. And there is no metaphor too, because the originating locality, even in what concerns the things or the direction of the movement of things, is not identifiable in objective space either. Not a relation in objective space. A direction is not in space. It is in filigree across it. It is therefore transposable to thought. The mind is neither here, nor here, nor here, and yet it is attached, bounded. It is not without bounds. Negation of negation and position. One does not have to choose between them. The mind is in no objective sight, and yet it is invested in a sight which it rejoins by its environs, which it circumvents, as my locality for myself is the point that all the vanishing lines of my landscapes designates to me, and which is itself invisible. And finally, I'll read from December 1959, a note on Leibniz. In denying the conception of perception reproduction, on my body in itself of the exterior thing in itself, I open up access to a brute being, which I would not be in the subject and object relation, and still less in the relation of effect with cause. In being in the world, relation will take the place held in Leibniz by the relation of reciprocal expression of the perspectives taken on the world, and hence God as the unique author of these diverse perspectives, which emanate from him as thoughts. The being thus discovered is, to be sure, not the God of Leibniz. The monadology thus disclosed is not the system of monads, substances, but certain Leibnizian descriptions, that each of the views of the world is a world apart, and that nevertheless, what is particular to one would be public to all. And the monads would be in relation of expression between themselves and with the world, that they differ from one another and from it as perspectives, are to be maintained entirely, to be taken up again in the brute being, to be separated from the substantialist and ontotheological elaboration Leibniz imposes upon them. The expression of the universe in us is certainly not the harmony between our monad and the others, the presence of the ideas of all things in it, but it is what we see in perception, to be taken as such instead of explaining it. The soul has no windows. That means being in the world. The pre-established harmony, like occasionalism, always maintains in itself and simply connects it with what we experience through a relation from substance to substance founded in God, instead of making it the cause of our thoughts. But it is precisely a question of rejecting entirely the idea of the in itself. It is the recovery of the theme of perception that transforms the significance of the Leibnizian idea of expression. Vertical world and vertical history.